Hi. So today we're going to look at the Sonsig REV by Relab. And this has just come out and I think it's an absolutely fantastic sounding reverb. I'm a real stickler for reverbs, a real connoisseur of them. I am looking for the most realistic sounding reverbs I can get for the kind of music that I mix and master, which is primarily jazz and world music. And some prog rock as well. But all of these kinds of music, you want to hear the details and you want a real sounding space. And you know, these days most people can't afford to record in a big studio with its own natural reverb. Almost everybody has to record in small studios these days, and that means you need great world-class real sounding reverb in the mix. And not many reverbs can cut that, in my view. 99% of them don't manage that, to my ears. But there's a handful that do, and this, I have to say, this newcomer is one of them. I put it right up there with the best ones. It can produce some really real sounding spaces, and it's really tweakable. Its simple interface really belies what it's capable of. It is capable of many different sounding reverbs, and they all sound great. Plus, it has some really cool sound design capabilities as well. So we'll be looking at this with drums, and I hope you find this useful. And so let's have a look. Okay, so here we have the Sonsig REV, and we're going to be listening to some drums. I'm going to put this snare and toms through it, and maybe a bit of kick occasionally, but I'll let you know when I'm going to do that. I'm going to start with the snare and toms, and I'm going to start with a room sound that I made. But before that, I'm going to just go over some of the controls. This has just come out, so I don't know it incredibly well, but I've been very impressed by it, as I said. And let's have a look now. We've got the time. That's straightforwardly the reverb time. The size control. Now this is unlike normal size controls. It actually changes the algorithm. Each of these, it's a click stop dial, and each one is a different algorithm. So it does change the size. It gets bigger in size, but each one is a new algorithm. And that gives it a lot of different sounds, a lot of different variability. The character control, this seems to control the envelope of the reverb. And the way it's described in the manual, it seems like that's also what they're saying, and it sounds like that too. So with number one, you get an immediate onset of the reverb. It's just there, and then the tail fades away. Number two is more of a kind of it blooms a little. It doesn't come in immediately as loud, and it gets louder, and then it kind of stays quite big. And number three is a more gradual kind of bloom, a gradual coming in of the reverb. But having said that, you know, it does a lot more than that. It really changes the quality of the reverb significantly when you change this. So again, it's like, I don't know if it is actually a different algorithm in terms of the reverb itself, but it changes the sound, the density, and the way the density changes over time really significantly. So it's as if it's a different algorithm. It changes it that much. And so, you know, with these two together, you've got an awful lot of reverb variation. More, I have to say, than most reverbs. A lot more than most reverbs. Next over, we've got this ensemble. Now this is like a modulation chorus kind of effect. But it's really different than that, because it happens within the actual algorithm of the reverb. It happens in the middle of it. So it's not like sticking a modulation or a chorus on the tail after the reverb's happened. It's actually happening inside the reverb. I don't know the details, and the details aren't explained, but you can really hear it sounds different. It doesn't sound like a chorus has been stuck on it. It changes the quality of the reverb itself in a more fundamental way. And it's really good. Again, it's like it giving you lots of different qualities of reverb, not just the same reverb with a more or less kind of modulation on it. At 0, there's no chorusing modulation, and at 1, I find it's just a thickening, lushening, a little bit of motion in it, and as you go up, you get a richer sound. And when you hit number 6, I think it is, you get a different process. It sounds significantly different, and all the rest of these sound more like each other but different. Much more of an effect, much more of an obvious change. These are more subtle, and then suddenly it gets much more effecty sounding. So again, an awful lot of variation. And one thing I found with this is that if you're doing a really short reverb, like a room, you know, these things are really coming to their own, I find. They really change the quality of the sound without you hearing, because when you've got a really short reverb like a room, you don't have time to hear any modulation. And yet it changes the tonal quality and the spatial quality of it really significantly. So you get an awful lot of variation here. And yeah, of course, on halls and things with a tail, you get a lot of variation too, in a different way. Now moving on here, we've got pre-delay. And this button here makes it DAW musical units, 8 notes, quarter notes, etc., which is really useful. Brightness control does what it says. I think it's I'm not sure whether it's a high shelf or what it is, but it definitely brings out the highs more. You'll hear I'll move that around. The high decay is like you'd expect on a reverb. It's how quickly the highs decay in relation to the rest of the time. So if you turn the time to a certain value, this will change the decay of the times relative to whatever time value you've set here. Diffusion is, in the case of this reverb, it's more like a density control. So it does diffuse the echoes more, but it also seems to make them a lot more dense. And not all diffusion does quite that same thing. To my ears, anyway, it sounds like the combination of a diffusion and density control. When you pull it all the way over here, it really sounds very thick and dense, like a plate, which I don't normally get that from most diffusion controls. So it's an interesting control, but really gives you a hell of a lot of variation. Over here, you start to hear the separate reflections more obviously, and over here, it's just completely dense. Really very flexible. And the tilt control, this is like a tilt EQ. So the more you move it to the right, the more it tilts the highs up and the lows down, and back into the minuses, you get more lows and less highs. And I'm not sure whether this, I think this is just a tilt EQ. Very effective and sounds really natural and nice, I have to say. This low tilt though, from according to the manual and the way it sounds too, it's a little bit more like a low decay. It isn't a low decay. It doesn't change the decay time of the lows, but it seems to change the way the lows reverberate. It doesn't sound like it's just an EQ. I don't think it is an EQ. It appears to, as you turn it down, you get more prominence of the lows in a way that doesn't sound like an EQ, but it sounds more like the lows are just reverberating more prominently. And as you turn it up, similarly, you get less of a predominance of lower refraction frequencies. Here, width control, pretty straightforward. Wet, dry, pretty straightforward. In and out, pretty straightforward and really useful. These are independent of patches. So, that's another thing, so that they don't change every time you change a patch. If you click on the name of these, they turn orange, and that means it locks them. So if you change a patch, it won't change that parameter. Super useful. This freeze function, really useful. It freezes, and unlike a lot of reverbs with freeze functions, it really freezes it in a very natural sounding way, like the Lexicon PCM does. Their native HAW has a really great freeze. It really sounds, it doesn't sound like any kind of loop you can hear, and it sounds really natural, like the reverb is just has an infinite sustain, and this is like that. It's really good. And then over here we have 3 different algorithms. This is more like an older style digital reverb. It is a bit more lo-fi and less realistic sounding. Can be useful if you don't want something realistic, but you just want a sustain effect, or maybe a plate that doesn't sound as real as plates don't, and you just want that kind of density, and you don't want, a hi-fi sound. The 224, I don't know that it refers to a Lexicon 224 or what, but it is a kind of medium level. Doesn't sound to me like a 224. It sounds better. It sounds like more realistic. When I say better, it sounds more realistic than that. But I guess it's somewhere in that ballpark, in the sense that I'm not saying 224s don't sound good. I'm just saying by today's standards, they don't sound much like a real space. Whereas to me, this sounds, you know, more like a real space. But yeah, still in that kind of middle, slightly lo-fi-ish, slightly denser, slightly smearier reverb can be useful for things. And then up here is the REV one, and that is a very modern sounding reverb. It's really clear, more like a real space, very detailed, and yeah, very nice. Having said this about the 224, I have found that this does give you that lexicon-y kind of sound, which is nice. That kind of, one of the things that I like about Lexicon, that I think is part of the Lexicon sound, is that it's a reverb which is very good at sustaining the tone part of what it's fed into it. So if you feed a note into it from a, you know, a piano or a guitar, a sustaining note, or a horn, or whatever it is, or a vocal, it can sustain, when the tail sustains, if you have a long tail, or even if you don't have such a long tail, the content of the tail, whatever the length, is, a lot of that content is the note. It's a sustaining of the note in a very sweet, musical, tonal way that most reverbs don't do in the same way. And the other thing about the Lexicon, especially the newer Lexicons, is that even if you have a really long tail, even when it's just going way out to the end, it still retains that tone. The note, you can tell what note it is really clearly, and it retains the timbre, tonal element of the instrument, that, you know, signature tone of the instrument, which I have to say very few reverbs do that. The Bricasti can also do that if you set it up to do that, but most reverbs don't do that. By the time you've got a long tail, whatever tone there has pretty much disappeared and is turned into a kind of noisy, fuzzy reverb, white and pink noisy kind of tail. Even if it's a smooth, nice tail, it's lost most of the tone and note value. And that's what's great about Lexicon. Well, it's what's characteristic, one of the things that's characteristic about Lexicon, let's put it that way. And this reverb can do that trick, and there are very few that can do that, and it's one of the things I like about it. And the REV does that, but the 224 also does that in a quite a Lexicon-y kind of way, and it can be really nice for reinforcing the tone of something. So, really great reverb, really super impressed by it. It's got realistic space sound, and it's got that tonal quality, and it's got the real lo-fi thing if that's what you want. It can go very dense like a plate, it can go very open, and it's got a lot of variability in the algorithm and the sound of it. So yeah, let's have a listen. So here's a room sound that I just made. I haven't had this long, it's only just come out, so I don't know it well at all, so I'm sure you could come up with all kinds of room sounds, and maybe a better room sound than this. But just to give you an idea of what it's like with a short, roomy reverb, I'm going to play first without, and then I'm going to put it in. Oh, actually, well, the way I'm going to put it in is I'm going to click this mute button. That's going to bring it in and out, just so you know it's not going to be here, it's going to be here. So here we go, without first. So that's muted. So nice punchy tone, and I'm going to I think I'm going to feed a bit of the kick in there just so you can hear what that's like. Okay, I've taken just a little bit of that kick and I've taken that back out again now. Again, like always with these things, I'm adding quite a lot of this just so you can hear it clearly, and I wouldn't add this much in a mix. Or let's put it this way, I wouldn't have any idea how much I was going to add until I heard it with the other instruments. But in this case, I'm turning it up pretty loud just so you can hear it really clearly. So now what I'm going to start doing is messing with some of these controls so you can hear a little bit of the quality of what they do, and then I'll switch to a different patch and do the same thing. Okay. So, you can hear just from what I was doing those controls, and just keeping it in the roomy kind of area of decay is an immensely varied amount of tone. It sounds like a bunch of different reverbs just by moving this around. Each of these sounds like a different reverb, and all really good, all the different quality of room sound. On the really short times, I find you can use this ensemble, and it again gives you added variation. But as soon as you get to the kind of bigger sounds that are a bit longer, I tend to keep this off, because it sounds, you can start to hear it modulating. I mean, not down here, these are more subtle, and then these get more extreme. So, and yeah, with these controls, you really get a lot of variation as well. So yeah, really useful. Now what I'm going to do is to move on to a hall sound and do the same thing. So let's have a listen to this hall sound. That again is one I made. So I've only gotten about halfway through these algorithms, but you can hear the difference. I mean, down here with a long decay time, I mean, it's just so radically different than up here or any of these other ones with the decay time, similar decay time, or decay time making the tail last the same length. So here we got like a really dense, thick thing going on, and but yeah, really each one sounding really good and useful. So I'm going to flip back over here now and start moving the other way. Now that is just so smooth. What a smooth tail from a snare. That is really, really nice, really lush. Okay, now I'm going to start clicking on some of these so you can hear the quality of these different algorithms. And again, I'm going to leave the decay time ridiculously long here just because it allows you to hear what's going on with the tail. Maybe I'll pull it back a little bit. So I've got a huge room size, and I haven't explored all of these yet, but I will go back and do that. But just again, so you can, it's more obvious what the difference is when you've got a long decay time. Yeah, so I mean, this does sound, the 224 sounds a little bit more like a kind of an older Lexicon, fairly smooth, but you know, not the realism of the space goes down, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. If you're using the reverb for reinforcement of tone, you're not necessarily after a realistic space. You're after a sustain effect and a tone supporting effect, and it can be really useful for that. And then over here on this QRS, it's even more less realistic space, and you can hear the space kind of contracting into a kind of much more of a kind of sustain effect rather than a space effect. And then over here you got this ultra high quality sounding, really impressively great sounding, I think, and the space sounds very real. And yet it retains all those nice sonic qualities. So yeah, really nice. So I'm going to leave it on here again. I'm going to go back and explore some of these other size settings. So back to some normality there at the end. So it's an amazingly versatile reverb. I mean, you could spend hours in here experimenting with the different combinations because there are just so many different sounds available from this. And it's going to take me some time to get to know all the different qualities in here. But, you know, the best way, I think, for me is going to be experimenting, find something really good, save it as a preset, experiment, find something really good, save it as a preset. And by doing that, I'll end up with a bunch of great presets that I've made, but also I'll have kind of figured out what the areas are that work for different things. So yeah, really recommend this. To me, it is up there with the Lexicon and the Seventh Heaven in terms of sound quality. It's head and shoulders above 90% of the reverbs out there to my ears. It's very impressive. And I hope you found this useful. If you did, please do subscribe and click like, ring the bell and all that stuff, and I hope to see you next time.